The action taking part in any event involves roles. Here we classify three main roles as self, or the agent from their own perspective, other, people or other sentient actors incidentally involved with the addressee in one way or another, and things, which are inanimate objects, might be close, might be distant. Let's focus on the vertical axis now, or functional transposition, represented in our grammar diagram here across the page. So let's consider the speaking I. The first person in a conversation is an embodied self, it's me speaking. This is now others involved might be the person with whom I'm speaking, which could be, for example, you, and people not with us at the same time, which might be, they, for example. This other may include creatures whose sentience we humans recognize, pets for interest, or wild animals, or even insects. Note how closely speech is related to body, because our bodily positions in relation to each other and our gesticulations partly configure these self-other thing relationships. Speech is always multimodal. This seems very straightforward, and what could be more distinct and more separate than you and me and them? But in a transpositional grammar, we start to notice that these are in fact relationships that are in constant movement. Now let me say something which is deceptively simple and deceptively complicated. Let's say we're speaking, and when we are, I am a you and you are an I. In our mind, we're always swapping things out like this. When you say I, it means you to you, and when I say you, it means I to you. The meaning in the conversation is about swapping things out, the transposition, swapping out you and I. Learning a new language, for example, means being able to make these kinds of elementary transpositions in a fluent way during a conversation. I want to give you another example of functional transposition now, how self and other are so very interconnected. Let's say you are telling me about your pain and I feel for you. I'm in a way becoming you. I have a feeling inside me that is like the feeling that you are expressing. Or I am watching a movie where the main character is experiencing pain, so much so that it makes me cry too. Well, these are transpositions in which the meaning of self puts itself in the position of the other. This is a transposition that we call empathy, an idea theorized by the great philosopher of meaning, Edith Stein. Form to form, I actually feel for what the other person is feeling, and I feel this from what they are saying in a conversation or the situation they're in if they're a character in a movie. Function to function, I'm transposing self and other. The meaning is not in our totally separate persons, you and me, or self and other, but it's in our sociable sharing of meaning. Of course, your real pain and my empathized pain are not the same, and the action that's playing through in the cinema of pain is not the actor's own pain, but one of an idealized person that they're acting. Your pain is real, mine and the actors are idealized, but by empathy, the real and the ideal come into connection. These are just some of the ways in which by transposition between self and other, we experience shared meaning. I also want to mention here in the process of role transposition, there is another place where text and speech are so very different. The self and other of a conversation is present, but the I in a text is distant, which means that although the I of reported speech would have been the self of a participant in its required dialogue, it is actually an other for a reader. That's a huge difference.
Now, I want to look at role transpositions in image. Picturing is about getting someone else to see something in a way similar to yourself. From the artist's perspective, they want to transpose the other's eye, the viewer's eye, with their own. From the viewer's perspective, they are seeing something as if they were the artist. But what the artist and the viewer see can never be quite the same, even though we can trace a relationship. The relation is transposition. I want to talk now about some of the ways this happens. So by example, here's the first known image of Mary, Mother of Christ, a 6th century icon from St. Catherine's Monastery in the Sinai Desert, Egypt. It's not very three-dimensional. There are only 2 planes, one for Mary and one for the 2 angels looking up at the hand of God. There are some shadows on their faces, but not much else. Now, I want to show you how the impression of three-dimensionality evolves in Western imaging by showing you 3 more Marys. Here is Cinebue's Santa Trinita Madonna of about 1290, shown at the Uffizi Gallery in Florence. Here in this image, there are many planes and the architectural frame is three-dimensional. Next also in the Uffizi is Giotto de Bordoni's Madonna of 1310. Here Mary has gained a more human body. We can see the shape of her breasts and the shadows in the folds of her clothing, and her face is more realistic. And finally, our 4th Mary, Sandro Botticelli's Madonna of the Book of 1482. This image feels like a much more realistic image of Mary than the first of these 4 images, the 6th century icon. This 2-dimensional image depicts a 3-dimensional world of space, inside the room, the world outside the window, and everyday objects, the bowl, the flowers, the book lying on the side of the shelf. The shelves recede into the corner of the room. One of the main changes across these Marys is the development of what we call linear perspective, where the distance recedes across an infinite progression of planes. This is one of the ways in which a 3D world is transposed onto a 2D image. Here is a panel created between 1425 and 1452, and by the goldsmith Lorenzo Ghiberti for the doors of the baptistry of the San Giovanni in Florence. These panels are depicting a relief of Old Testament scenes. You can see these wonderful doors today in the Museum of the Duomo in Florence. This is a foundational work in the development of linear perspective. The depth effect is created by making things in the background smaller than things in the foreground. And have a look at the arches for this effect. Ghiberti theorized his art and the art of others in his book, The Commentari. Referring to the baptistry door, he said, "I strove to observe every measure of proportion, seeking the closest possible imitation of nature. The figures are relieved against the planes so that the nearer figures appear larger than those further out, just as they are in reality." Architect Filippo Brunelleschi was a contemporary of Ghiberti's. Here is a depiction of his 1425 demonstration outside the Florence baptistry. Using a canvas with a peephole and a mirror, he showed the diminishing size of the walls of the building the more distant they became. The central point in a hypothetical distance was the vanishing point, a centering line of sight orientated to the horizon. The relative sizes of seen objects could be figured mathematically. Scholars today think this may not have been such an original idea because these principles had already been figured out mathematically by the Arab thinker Al-Hasan nearly 500 years before in his book of optics. The Florentines had a translation of this book available to them. My point is this: realism is an invention. From form to form, realistic images create the effect of seeing a 3D world on a 2D plane. We think it is realistic, but if we look up, we would discover that vertical lines recede as well. But if we do that, it will look like the buildings are falling down and the columns we know are straight. This is also one-eyed vision, and we discover that as soon as we put on the viewing glasses for 3D imaging, and then our field of vision is round, clear in the middle and blurry on the outside. So, realistic images give us an impression that is not true to reality as we see it. Realistic images are in fact an altered reality, and realism is a visual trick, an optical illusion. Now I want to speak about the transposition on the functional plane with realistic imaging, in this case photography. Here is a wonderful photograph of the great philosopher and feminist Simone de Beauvoir, taken by Henri Cartier-Bresson in 1946. We have a complicated succession of self-other transpositions here. His eye has become your eye. The picture is taken at the height of the head, looking at his subject, and her eye, or we might assume that the photographer assumes, looking into some kind of philosophical distance. The camera never lies, but of course it always does, because the truth of the photograph is the thing that it shows, or not only that, it is the self-eye in the form of the seeing eye of the photographer, transposed into a scene. And now you, the viewer, are transposing yourself into that photographer's eyes, that other self. This is how we parse these movements. The meaning of these roles is in the moves they make, each role begging to be swapped out with another.